Okay, everyone, welcome to our Drone as a First Responder webinar today with the program that started in Manatee County, Florida. It's kind of exciting. We're talking today about AEDs, NARCAN, tourniquets, and more as far as delivery to an emergency scene. And without further ado, my name is Charles Werner. I'm the Director of Drone Responders. We welcome you to today's webinar. And with me today is Gordon Folks and James Crutchfield. And I'm going to turn this over to Gordon Folks to tell you about himself, and then we'll have James Crutchfield introduce himself, and we'll get started with the program overview.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. Hey, everybody. Appreciate everyone tuning in today. My name is Gordon Folks. I'm the CEO of Archer First Response Systems. We've been really focused on building a kind of a fairly unique DFR infrastructure, specifically around emergency drone logistics. So what we hope to cover today is one kind of an intro on this operation in general. I'll eventually dive into some real in-depth detail on the technical side of the infrastructure, the regulatory frameworks under which these systems operate, how they're integrated into dispatch and some of the SOPs and a handful of other topics. But to begin, I also want to introduce James Crutchfield here, the Public Safety Director of Manatee County. Jamie, if you want to intro yourself here.
Hey, thanks, Gordon. James Crutchfield, Deputy Director of Public Safety. I'm the EMS Chief here in Manatee County. Where is Manatee County, people asks? Just south of Tampa on the Gulf side of Florida. It's a county of about 800 square miles, and we operate a 911 first response EMS service as well. So thanks.
Awesome. So just a little bit of background before we dive in. Myself and the team at Manatee County and Jimmy have been working on this particular project since about 2019. We're quite early in the unmanned air system DFR world, but really hyper-focused on emergency logistics. So like I said, it's a bit of a different twist on kind of the standard DFR that most people are familiar with, mostly focused on situational awareness and cameras in the sky. Today, we're going to be really talking about getting time-sensitive medical devices directly to scenes and what this kind of silo of DFR looks like. So to begin, I want to first share my screen here and just show a brief video of the installation that we have here in Manatee County. So can you see my screen? Cool. So what you see, this white housing unit that you see in this video here is what we call our ground control hub. I think probably everyone in this group is familiar with the drone in the box solutions. This ground control hub is our quote unquote box. It helps provide a homeostatic environment for the aircraft, keeps it charged. We have a handful of sensors inside of that housing unit to help us monitor its internal environment as well as its external environment. When the system is deployed, the housing unit rolls open and the aircraft is deployed, just as standard drone in the box operations are. Our backend infrastructure, and I'll dive a lot more in depth into this a little later, but performs a pre-flight check where we're looking at a ton of operating variables, namely hyperlocalized weather conditions, both current and forecasted, live air traffic, temporary flight restrictions, advisories, the health of the aircraft, the health of the housing unit, all the health of the network connectivity and everything in between. And if all of these vary threshold, then the aircraft can be deployed. Our systems are usually airborne in about 14 seconds. We fly the free fly systems all to X. I'll touch on that later. But once the aircraft arrives on a scene, we lower the payload down to the ground on a tether. And then the 911 caller can respond and grab this payload and unload the devices that are in there for the particular emergency. Our standard payload is an automated external defibrillator, cardiac arrest, NARCAN nasal spray for overdoses, and then tourniquets for hemorrhaging. But really, at the end of the day, this is an emergency drone logistics platform that can help transport really, 7 pounds of, whatever would be required for a particular operation directly to a 911 caller. So before I kind of dive any further, I want to just have Jimmy chime in here and kind of provide some insight on why a program like this is something that Manatee County wanted to consider. What are some of the core goals, some of the core outcomes that we're hoping to see, and your just general thoughts on now that we're live and functional, what are your thoughts on the program, and what do you think the outcomes are going to be?
Yeah, sure. So, I was listening to you speak, Gordon, and I would say that Manatee County has been on the cutting edge, since 2019, when we first started talking and getting our heads together to figure out how we would make this happen. The overarching goal here for Manatee County EMS was really to not only enhance our emergency response capabilities, but improve patient outcomes. Focusing on those time-sensitive syndromes that you were speaking of, where a lay person can have significant impact to a person's outcome and their ability to walk out of the hospital, from a sudden cardiac arrest, where we know that rapid AED usage will have impact on that individual's overall survivability. Someone who has overdosed, where we know for a fact that if access to NARCAN will bring that individual back to life and help them to continue to breathe. And we also know, based off research, that someone who has significant bleeding, being able to stop and or control the bleeding has significant impact on that individual's ability to be a part of society and live another day. With those three, I guess, core syndromes in mind, and knowing that a lay person could use those devices or have access to devices, I think that's where all the synergy started, Gordon, if you wanted my honest opinion. And I would say, based off that information, we started overlaying and finding out, where these incidents are taking place, and you using your knowledge of flight patterns and so forth. I hope that you can talk a little bit more about that, because I'm the medical guy. That's how we came up with the three packet delivery process. I don't know if you were looking for some additional information on those three items, but honestly, having those expedited response times to those time sensitive items will have a significant impact. EMS, we're in the business of seconds matter. And when your aircraft is able to deliver life-saving equipment faster than an EMS crew can even get into an ambulance and get on the road, that is impactful.
Awesome. And so, Jimmy, I think you can probably provide some unique perspective here in your role, and kind of discussing maybe some of the people that are involved in the operation. Obviously, we have helped manage some of this infrastructure, but it's not, obviously, you can't just, strap an AED to a drone and call it a day. There's kind of this team effort around this, from leadership all the way through to the Emergency Communication Center. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the Emergency Communication Center, some of the training they've gone through.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that people forget about the voice on the phone often. They are the first responders, and we're using those individuals' expertise to provide over-the-phone instructions to individuals that are calling 911. So if someone calls 911 and is experiencing a cardiac arrest, if they're willing and they're in the catchment area to receive this aircraft deployment, the telecommunicator, the dispatcher in the Emergency Communication Center, will provide instructions of go outside your house, pick up this device, turn it on, and start walking through the usage of the AED, of NARCAN, of a tourniquet. They are part of, I guess, the team that's been involved throughout the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a full end-to-end solution here. And it takes knowledge set from everybody, from answering 911 calls, understanding the standard operating procedures on when to deploy these systems, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, all the way through that continued care of instruction on how to use these devices and so forth. So certainly crucial to have this kind of cohesive connection all the way through that chain so that this can have the best chance of success. Kind of last question that I want to have your insight on here, Jamie, that you can certainly provide. This is the first agency in the United States to run a program like this. So there's some probably unique nuances that you've experienced and learned through this early stage of taking the system live, dealing with the public, dealing with commissioners, understanding what that support and response has been. Do you want to speak on that a little bit, on some of the maybe touch on some of the public outreach that we did? I have the website up here for the program on the Manatee County organization's website, but maybe talk on what we've done to reach out to the public and what some of that response has been.
Yeah, sure. I do think that communication is key to pretty much anything, right? And I do feel that we've had a multi-pronged approach at ensuring that not only the elected officials were getting the right amount of communication, but getting it at the right cadence, and also the community as a whole was getting a cadence of communication. We conducted commissioner briefings, like you said, where they were open to the public, of course, and we did a deep dive into the program overview. We addressed concerns openly. We talked about privacy, highlighted a lot of the safety items on your aircraft, and then also, in open form, responded to some of the commissioners' concerns. And it was widely met with enthusiasm. I do think that once you start explaining the outcomes and the purpose and the designs and all the safety mechanisms, there wasn't a whole lot of hesitancy, if I had to be completely honest with everybody. We also did a community mailer where it had FAQs that went out to the catchment area where individuals could see this device. We reached out to some of news media and did a lot of pressers, and also with like the old-fashioned newspapers. So I think that in general, most residents recognize the benefits of the service, and when there were concerns, we addressed them openly and willingly. And I just can't think of anything that was major. Can you maybe highlight something, or maybe something I'm forgetting?
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agreed. I think from commission standpoint, the program was met with enthusiasm and excitement. It's, you mentioned all the media, people post on Facebook, and you scroll through and you read the comments, and there's always going to be hit and miss. There, people who are angry and people who are happy. And so it's always kind of a mixed bag. But I think the main aspect of it was truly like transparently addressing the issues and concerns that were raised by citizens. And I think one of the main things was privacy. And I'm sure a lot on this call who do run standard DFR operations deal with the privacy question a lot. For these particular operations, we're really focused on getting the medical devices on scene and getting the aircraft away from that scene as quickly as possible, as to not distract and to add another layer of complexity to that treatment. So, we're not actively recording citizens as they're retrieving these devices. We're not, and I think being able to, inform people and let them know that, we're not recording video of people using these devices. Truly, the core purpose of this is just that logistics aspect and ensuring that we can get these time-sensitive emergency medical devices directly to the scene. And I think being able to address the privacy concern was a big piece of it. But yeah, I mean, other than that, so far the feedback has been great, good commissioner support. And of course, the whole team at Manatee County has been just incredible to work with. And it's been a long road, but now that we're finally here, operational and live, it's been real exciting. So cool. Jimmy, thank you for that insight. I'm going to kind of transition this into more of like a deep dive on how this infrastructure works, how these systems work, the regulatory framework under which we do these operations. And then, I'll share some images here of our infrastructure, and then, towards the end, we can dive into some questions and answers. But one of the most important piece, just to start with the exciting regulatory aspect of all of this, what I wanted to share with everyone is probably one of the more important documents that a lot of people may not even know about. But this is a legal interpretation called the Fields Interpretation that was released in April of 2023. And this is probably one of the most important documents for DRONERS first responder programs, especially as DFR starts to kind of spread its wings, no pun intended, outside of just situational awareness and into other use cases where the utility of unmanned air systems can truly help forward these missions. So I'm going to highlight kind of the most important aspect of this, which is this paragraph here, which is regarding initial and previous legal interpretations and that address the governmental function question. And I'm not sure if anybody in this call, I know a lot of people operate under Part 107, and there's probably some that operate under Part 91 as public aircraft operations. So these particular operations are run under Part 91 as public aircraft operations. But this short paragraph here is probably one of the most impactful pieces of documentation as of late from the FAA, and namely because it clearly states that the interpretation specific to governmental function is no longer applicable for unmanned aircraft, and that's a big deal. When we first started this program in 2019. We were attempting to run this as a public aircraft operation. It's not a commercial operation in any sense of the word. There's no one calls a private entity and pays them for deliveries and emergencies. They call 911, they call Manatee County, and Manatee County's team responds. And this is another asset that the county has to use to respond to these emergencies in the same way that situational awareness-based DFR programs operate as well. In 2019, though, and all the way up through literally this date of April in 2023, we were held up by this question of governmental function and whether or not an EMS agency bringing a defibrillator to a dying person who has called 911 qualifies as a governmental function. And set aside that I think it's clear that is a governmental function. This interpretation makes it clear that the question of governmental function doesn't even get raised for unmanned air systems and their qualification for public aircraft operation. The core pieces that are required for public aircraft operations are simply that it is a incorporated government of a state or a state government that either owns or leases the aircraft for more than 90 days and then does not do the operation for commercial purposes. And that's it. Other than those requirements, unmanned air system operations fall under public aircraft operations and can be run under Part 91. So to explain the generalized regulatory framework on how these systems operate, they are operated as public aircraft operations under Part 91. And that's how a certificate of authorization for these operations would be achieved. And then secondary to that, if you'd like to do these operations beyond visual line of sight, a waiver to 91.113B is required. There's another aspect of this, why these should be run under Part 91. And I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the hazardous materials concerns with 107, but you can't fly hazardous materials under Part 107. And the interesting thing about automated external defibrillators is that they have a very small lithium-ion battery inside of those defibrillators. And you might say to yourself, well, we have massive lithium polymer batteries that power our aircraft on board, and those aren't considered hazardous materials. And you would be right. But the small, like nickel-sized battery in the AED, smaller than an iPhone 14 battery, is considered a hazardous material. So in fact, you actually, unless you were to get an exemption or a really in-depth waiver for carrying hazardous material under 107, you actually can't do these operations under 107. So doing these as public aircraft operations under Part 91 is the way to go from a regulatory standpoint. So I want to dive into some of the really interesting and cool aspects of our particular infrastructure here at Archer First Response Systems, how we run these operations, how they function, and kind of what sets them apart from your standard DFR operation. To begin, we've created a computer vision based satellite analysis platform. And that's what you see on the screen here. This is Archer Survey. We use this internally. And what we've done is we've trained a handful of computer vision algorithms to look at up-to-date satellite imagery and help us target places where we don't want to make deliveries and places where we would want to be able to make deliveries. So for example, we don't want to put an AED on someone's rooftop. That wouldn't be helpful. So for example, if you're using the exact precise coordinate of someone's phone during a 911 call and they happen to be inside, you'd end up lowering an AED on the rooftop, and it's going to be hard to get, and it's not going to be useful. So we've trained to identify rooftops and are able to block these out. Same thing with water bodies. We don't want to drop an AED in the middle of a pond. One, because the defibrillators are not waterproof, and also it's just going to be tricky to respond and retrieve that. We also don't want to deliver AEDs in the middle of tree-covered areas. So we've actually trained an algorithm that helps us identify trees, and we're actually able to separate out tree coverage from grass-covered areas. So you can see kind of like these golf courses are available and some other areas where there's grass, but the tree areas are blocked out. So when we install these systems, we download up-to-date imagery. Usually it's about a week old, and then we run these analyses across this imagery to help us determine where we do want to make deliveries. So places where we do want to make deliveries would be like driveways. So we have a driveway algorithm that allows us to pinpoint basically the latitude and longitude of every single driveway in a particular area. We also like residential roads and kind of like smaller roads. And so we kind of identify those and pick those out. We also specifically target golf courses and put coordinates in those. And what's left is, tens of thousands of acceptable delivery coordinates that we can make deliveries to. So what this end result looks like is, oops, let me see if I can move this. Is a database assigned to every installation that we have that is preloaded with, thousands of coordinates that are acceptable for emergency deliveries. So you can see we have them in all the driveways, kind of up and down the residential roads, through the parks and the sidewalks. And this is crucial, and this is what actually helps facilitate us making such immediate and quick deliveries. The underlying theory of how these systems work is we ingest the latitude and longitude of the 911 caller, and we use their location to determine which one of these delivery coordinates is closest to that caller. We then grab the mission file that's associated with that coordinate. It gets uploaded to the aircraft, and then that aircraft is ready to fly that mission. From there, we perform an automated pre-flight check, like I described in the beginning of this presentation, where we're looking at live air traffic, temporary flight restrictions, advisories, GPS health, battery percentages, connectivity, and a handful of other variables. And if all of those variables pass the pre-flight check, then the aircraft is deployed on that waypoint mission. So what's kind of unique about this infrastructure is that we know exactly every single flight path that this system might take. And it allows us to basically like program a particular area that these systems cover that can be responded to. We also block out static obstacles in a particular area. You can see these are these triangles here. Here, this one's actually in this initial coverage area. But these are either static obstacles like AM, FM radio towers that are either over 150 feet or close to it, or they're power substations or just general critical infrastructure that's just safer to stay away from. So all of these systems are pre-programmed with usually 60 to 75,000 acceptable coordinates with 60 to 75,000 waypoint missions assigned to each of those coordinates. And we're basically ready to fly any one of those at any given time. And that's kind of one of the core differences between emergency drone logistics and kind of generalized drone logistics. If you're doing some type of commercial delivery operation, you can take the extra 5 or 10 minutes to plan out a flight path and pick the right time, and it would be good to fly it. But if someone on the other end of it is dying of cardiac arrest, you don't have that time. You have to be ready to deploy. You have to know you can get that AED somewhere where they can easily access it. And you got to be able to go right now. And so that's kind of our core focus, is ensuring this kind of immediate deployment anywhere within a coverage area, but to a specific point where we know it's safe to deliver and they can get these devices. One other thing I'd like to show on here is our integration into Rapid SOS portal. So right now, all of this infrastructure that I've explained, the hardware, the housing units, the aircraft, all the pre-flight checks, all the deployment requirements, everything is integrated into both Rapid SOS portal and Rapid Deploy's Radius platform. So any agency that's listening to this presentation that uses either Rapid SOS portal or Rapid Deploy Radius, you guys are actually already equipped with everything that you need from a software and integration standpoint within your emergency communication center to implement programs like this. So here's just a short video of how the Rapid SOS integration works. On the left-hand side of the screen here, the 911 calls stack up. I'm sure a lot of people are probably familiar with this screen. When you click on a particular, when you click on a particular 911 call, the map will zero in on that caller. And then on the top here, there's now a request drone button. So you can click request drone and confirm you want to share the data. What's happening here, I'll pause, is Rapid SOS is sending Archer the latitude and longitude anonymously of that caller, and Archer instantaneously uses that location, searches the database of delivery coordinates, finds the nearest one to that caller, and then responds back on the map here where that delivery would occur. So you can see this delivery point. When you click on the delivery point, we provide an ETA for that particular delivery, along with a confirmation link to deploy. So if following standard operating procedures, there isn't a ground-based asset that's less than 2 minutes and 52 seconds away, and it is a cardiac arrest or an overdose call, you can click to confirm. When you click to confirm, you can click on that delivery coordinate to get an updated ETA. As well as we actually live stream the telemetry, like the GPS location telemetry from the aircraft onto Rapid SOS's map as well. So you get to see as this aircraft is making its flight from its takeoff location to that delivery coordinate. So at this point, call takers or assignment dispatchers can, be talking to the caller saying, we're sending you an AED. It'll be there in 1 minute and 16 seconds. It'll be, in your driveway or wherever the delivery coordinate is. And they can start walking them through CPR. That's kind of the unique thing about this implementation of defibrillators, is that now the lay rescuer doesn't have to leave the victim in search of an AED. They can actually stay with the victim, perform CPR, keep the blood circulation going as best they can for the short period of time that it takes for these aircraft to get to that delivery location. So just, in this video, the aircraft eventually makes its way to this delivery coordinate. I think all in all, the delivery on this particular flight was about, 2 minutes and 30 seconds or so. And once the aircraft does arrive we'll be there in 22 seconds. Once the aircraft does arrive, just as you saw in that video, it'll hover over the scene at 200 feet above ground level. It'll lower the payload down to the ground, and then the aircraft returns home. And then the call taker or the assignment dispatcher can relay to that person, all right, the AED's arrived. You can go out, grab the package, open it up, and apply the defibrillator. So this is kind of what it looks like once it arrives. It'll hover, and then it kind of returns home. So that's kind of a very, 10,000 foot view on this infrastructure. There's a lot of moving parts under the hood. I think one other really interesting and unique aspect about our infrastructure is all of our aircraft's command and control connectivity is done over AT&T FirstNet. Right now, I believe we're the first and only drone deployment company that's using FirstNet as a command and control linkage. So the aircraft does have a prioritized network connection on band 14 through FirstNet at all times, and obviously during flight. And our ground control hubs are also connected to the internet via AT&T FirstNet. So those also have that prioritized connection. Last piece I will mention here is on top of this infrastructure, I have one other video to show. Let me pull it up. We have, obviously, air risk and ground risk are the core pieces of risk mitigation that are required for these types of operations. And we have successfully completed the F3322-22 ASTM standard for parachute recovery systems on the free fly system Alta X, which is the aircraft that we fly in these systems. So I'll just show like just a super, brief video of what our testing process looked like. I don't know if anybody in this call has gone through any of the ASTM standards for parachute recovery systems, but they are extremely strenuous, very stressful, especially when you're flying the Alta X. It's a fairly big aircraft, fairly expensive aircraft. And when you're doing, 45 forced failures in a handful of different scenarios, it's quite stressful. But fortunately, we successfully completed this, and now all of the aircraft that we use in these systems are equipped with an ASTM certified parachute recovery system to help mitigate the ground risk of these operations. So it's a lot of information, I know. We want to try and save some time for questions and answers. So I will actually let this video play a little bit. Once we get into the forward flight stuff, it gets pretty crazy. It's pretty cool to watch. So I'll just let it play for a second. The ASTM requires a handful of forced failure scenarios, full forward flight, full motor cut, full forward flight, single motor cut, hovering, full motor cut, hovering, single motor cut. It's a very intense process, but we successfully completed that. But anyways, so I'll pause there. I know we're trying to keep a lot of time for question and answers. I know this is a fairly unique DFR use case, but one kind of final thought that I want to leave here with before we dive into questions is that emergency drone logistics like this side of DFR, I really do think has so much unique nuance to it that it kind of deserves its own focus. For example, even just the aircraft used in these systems, like I know a lot of people will use DJI M300s for DFR situational awareness systems, and you can use a smaller aircraft if you're going to be doing, just camera-based reconnaissance or situational awareness. But for these logistics operations, using a larger aircraft is just honestly safer, bigger props, handle wind better. They can have just a bit more flexibility and more agility, even with a little bit heavier of a payload. And there's also just a ton of other nuance to these operations where you can't just throw a servo on a drone that can drop a payload and then call it a day for realistic, like larger scale and instantaneous emergency delivery. For some use cases, I would say for kind of the life jacket flotation device where you'll likely have a pilot on a beach that just uses that aircraft to get out over the water and drop a payload. Then I think, having a servo on an existing type of aircraft where you can just drop something is probably sufficient. But when it comes to broad scale, instantaneous emergency logistic response, there's a lot of nuance involved. And I think that this sector of, DFR is, kind of deserves its own nuance and its own focus. But anyways, I'll pause there. It's a lot of information, but happy to answer any questions, address anything on any topic really on this.
Yes, so you do have one question here that says, maybe a bit early, and you may be covered later. What liability is present for the organization if there is a failure with SUAS batteries, GPS lock, other failures when the SUAS is dispatched to 911 caller? If so, how did Manatee County overcome this liability challenge?
So there's kind of two ways to cover these. One is having as many mitigations as possible. So having even remote pilots in loop who can take over in GPS failure scenarios, having ASTM certified parachute recovery systems in the case of any type of critical component failure, having redundancies in power supplies and all the rest. And then on top of that, having effective insurance policies around unmanned air system operations in general, both from the Manatee County side and from the Archer side, is another kind of answer to these issues. But Jimmy, I don't know if you want to touch on that as well. Yep. Okay.
Okay, then another question is this intended to fly BVLOS? And if so, how are you accomplishing?
Yep. Yeah. So this infrastructure is really built around a 5-minute response that's really focused on the time for cardiac arrest treatment. We're trying to keep that down to 5 minutes. So within the 5-minute time frame, these systems can cover about 35 square miles total, which would be a circle with a radius of about 3.2 miles. So, you can run these systems as visual line of sight operations if you have VOs and you might have a limited coverage area, and obviously it's going to require more manpower to do so. You can also run these as beyond visual line of sight operations. We have an airspace monitoring service that we use and have gotten beyond visual line of sight approvals, or we're waiting on the final signatures for the beyond visual line of sight approvals for Mode C Vail operations. So we have concept of operations around our airspace monitoring service that helps facilitate beyond visual line of sight operations. And a lot of that is around, we kind of have two different approaches on airspace monitoring and management. There's kind of the pre-flight side where we do a airspace sanitation check. The cool thing about having these 65,000 pre-programmed flights is before we get a call, we don't know which flight we're going to fly. So it might be any one of those. But once we do get a call, we know exactly the flight path that we're going to take. We also can very, very closely estimate the exact time of day where we would be altitude-wise throughout that flight path. So we're able to actually do airspace sanitation and look for low-flying aircraft within a certain buffer zone around that flight path. So we do this before we fly, and that's part of that pre-flight check to ensure that there are no low-flying air traffic within that buffer zone. And then in flight, we also have an in-flight buffer around the aircraft that would cause warnings and then evasive maneuvers should certain rings of that buffer be penetrated. We also do coordinate directly with the hospital systems in the area that fly medevac helicopters. Usually they would be kind of the only ones that are around the 200 feet realm most, if not all of the time. So having a level of coordination with them, making sure that they're aware of your operation and having lines of communication with them is important as well. But so to answer the question, yeah, these systems can be used in visual line of sight type operations as well as beyond visual line of sight operations. And in the beyond visual line of sight, we cover about 35 square miles with average response times of 2.5 minutes.
The other question was so when did you start flying? And how often are these drones being used by Manatee County?
So May 2nd, I believe, was the first day of live operations. This initial installation we are doing in phases. We are doing a visual line of sight phase first, and then we'll roll into a beyond visual line of sight phase. So in this phase one, it is a limited coverage area. It's about 7 square miles total that it will cover. Since then, we've had one call for an unconscious overdose, I believe it was. Unfortunately, we did not pass our pre-flight check for that flight, so it was not flown. It was in the middle of a thunderstorm, so we didn't make that flight. But we did have kind of the first experience all the way through, like from 911 call to the ECC, and then back down to the aircraft. And we had the correct mission chosen. The delivery was in the driveway of the caller. It was a 50-second ETA. But the assignment dispatcher, didn't relay information like we're sending you defibrillator, we're sending you NARCAN, because they were informed that the system was offline and did not get deployed because it didn't pass that pre-flight check. So due to the limited initial coverage area, we expect the general call volume on this one initial particular system to be relatively low. But that's where we're at so far.
Let's see. Have you encountered any challenges or anticipate challenges for flights over into National Park Service lands?
So in this particular operation, we have not encountered this. We're not in a National Park Service area. I think that would probably take a level of coordination. What I would anticipate would be when the certificate of authorization for any one of these systems is applied for, that's when this would be addressed. The cool thing, again, about these systems is that they are installed at a particular area and cover a specific geographical area. So when you do apply for a certificate of authorization, you're able to say, this is the installation point, this is the proposed operating area, and then you can address any concerns of various different airspace or limitations or TFRs within that particular operating area. So if you were to install one of these systems and that proposed operating area did overlap a national park area or even a TFR, or even outside of a Class G into a Class C, D, or B airspace, you can address that in the certificate of authorization. It might require specific mitigations. There might be some limitations that the FAA wants to put on you. But again, the standard operating procedures around these operations are such that they're only flown in these life or death, time-sensitive emergencies where ground assets couldn't respond quickly enough to get to that victim. So it is kind of like a unique, nuanced operating situation where the risk-reward ratio is, fairly unique.
Yeah, and I think just as a mention here is that there's no restriction unless there's something unusual about the national parks that you can fly over the Park Service. It's just that the limitations are typically on landing in and on national park property. One of the things I wanted to ask you that's before I get to the next question is one of the things you learned in your response process was the weather, and that you're working on fine-tuning some of your weather operations.
Yes. Yeah. So weather in Florida it's kind of like it's very challenging. So I'm actually fortunate and grateful that we get to kind of try and tackle one of the more challenging weather in areas. And yeah, so we took an extremely conservative approach on weather. We have thresholds for current environments, and then we also have thresholds for future-looking forecasts. We basically initially we're looking at a rolling hour forecast, and then using a particular likelihood of precipitation within the next hour to determine whether or not a system should be online or offline at this moment. We have since updated this and are now looking at a rolling minute-by-minute forecast, and then using the dynamic actual flight times of any particular flight to help us better determine kind of a go, no-go from a forecast standpoint. So we do have localized sensors for weather. So we are looking at those, and we're also looking at a handful of APIs for current and forecasted weather. And then on top of that are doing this kind of dynamic minute-by-minute rolling forecast. So for example, again, another cool benefit of everything being pre-programmed is you can really be kind of proactive about some of this. But if we have a request for a flight and we see that it's going to be a 3-minute delivery, that total flight time is going to be a minute from takeoff to altitude, 3 minutes to get out there. We loiter for a minute while we lower that payload down, 3 minutes back, and then a land. So we add an 8-minute buffer on top of that. So that was 3, 6, 8. So it'd be about 17, trying to do mental math here, but it'd be about a 16 or 17-minute window that we'd be looking at. And what does that forecast look like within that next 17 minutes? both for the takeoff and delivery locations. But it is definitely a challenge. I think it's a challenge that a lot of people with drone-in-the-box solutions, are trying to tackle. But, I'm glad we're here in Florida and kind of having to deal with, scattered storms all over the place, and you'll have rain for 20 minutes and then it'll be clear for the rest of the day. But that's kind of how we're tackling it.
So the next question is, are these flights completely autonomous, and can a pilot take manual control of the aircraft?
So the flights are all autonomous. They are pre-programmed waypoint missions. So I'm sure you guys have run like a survey mission or some type of pre-programmed waypoint mission. They're flown just like that. Basically, each system has about 60 to 70,000 pre-programmed missions that it can tap into and pull from. That said, though, a remote pilot can take over just as they would be able to in any other type of waypoint mission that you're flying. So in an emergency scenario, a remote pilot can take over and fly more manually if they want to. But yeah, so they are autonomous, flights.
And then I have, what does a system like this cost for Manatee County, and are any grants being used to build out the system?
Jimmy, I don't know if you want to take that one or if you want me to cover.
Yeah, so I think that we might be able to tag team this. So we are fortunate in Manatee County. We back up to Hillsborough County, and inside Hillsborough County is Tampa. Tampa houses a level 1 trauma center. And I'm giving you all this background because it just makes a little bit more sense. Tampa houses a level 1 trauma center, and it's an educational hospital, teaching hospital. And so we have a partnership. It's a 3-way partnership with Tampa General, Archer First Response, and the county. So county residents, the county's general tax, we're not there's zero cost to us, but it's through a local partnership.
Yeah. So, and so we try and do our best to work with agencies as best possible to help equip them with this infrastructure. And we kind of have 2 models of doing this. One, agencies, if they'd like, can just outright have this infrastructure in place. When we provide a lease, service, and operating agreement, we lease the infrastructure, we help service it, and we can help operate it as well. Our goal really is to be a force multiplier so that these are not really a burden on an agency that doesn't require a ton of extra manpower or a ton of training. And so agencies can do that directly with us. Or we also work with hospital systems, just as Jimmy mentioned. For example, Tampa General Hospital is one of our champion partner hospitals. And Archer helps work with with that hospital system, basically around a sponsorship type program where the hospital can sponsor Archer systems in the same way they'd sponsor like a hockey team or anything else. And we are able to help facilitate installations for agencies with those partners.
Okay. What aircraft are you using, and what's the payload weight?
Yeah, so we fly the Free Fly Systems Alta X. Here in Florida, we are, I guess, one of the leaders, if you want to call it that, around the legislation of preventing the use of unmanned air systems with critical components manufactured in foreign countries of concern. So I know a lot of people are fighting the DJI ban from a federal standpoint, but here in Florida, they are banned. So we don't fly DJI products. We actually moved off of DJI in 2019. I kind of read the tea leaves at that point. I saw this was kind of the direction things were going. So we moved on to the Free Fly Systems Alta X. They have a great track record of making amazing unmanned air systems. I know the Forestry Service in the United States have been flying hundreds of the Alta X. I know it's kind of one of NASA's go-to aircrafts as well. So it's the Alta X is what we fly. That's also what we did the ASTM certification for that parachute system on. And we fly that aircraft up to 55 pounds. The Alta X itself, I think, could successfully carry about 40 pounds of payload, but that would put it over the 55-pound limitation. So with us, with the aircraft, the two batteries that we use, our payload, which includes onboard computers, the FirstNet LTE cell modems, our payload lowering mechanisms, and all the rest, I think we can carry about up to 6 to 7 pounds of payload.
And that's freeflysystems.com, correct?
I
Is that full
believe,
text?
I believe so. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
put
the
that
right.
in the chat. Hey, one of the questions you mentioned earlier about BVLOS, and you talked about Mode-C Veil. One, can you explain to people that may not know what Mode-C Veil is? And second, can you differentiate? Are you doing this with human visual observer, or is it going to be that technology allowing no visual observer? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for some background, Mode-C Veil is a unique airspace that's 30 nautical miles outside of Class B towered airports. This particular airspace, so it's a big area. It's 60 nautical miles in diameter, and almost all aircraft within that Mode-C Veil must broadcast on ADS-B. So the biggest challenge around beyond visual line of sight, of course, is this detect and avoid challenge. And the big thing is the non-participating traffic. So within the Mode-C Veil, legally, everyone is required to broadcast on ADS-B. So if you do have an ADS-B receiver on board your aircraft, you're able to more or less see everybody in that airspace. So we have our initial system with Manatee County, the one that was in that video and that we're running on a day-to-day basis right now, falls outside of the Mode-C Veil for Tampa International Airport. So for this one, we are currently running as a visual line of sight operation. However, we have submitted the certificate of authorization and the waiver requests for a secondary location that does fall within that Mode-C Veil of Tampa International Airport. We've received the certificate of authorization from that, and then we've had a bunch of calls with the Federal Aviation Administration telling us that we have the approval for the beyond visual line of sight waiver without a visual observer within that Mode-C Veil. Apparently, it's just waiting on final signatures. But we've talked with the 91 team, we talked with AFS, and they've given us the green light on it. So that one would be without visual observer, remote pilots, and then around our particular ConOps. So this includes that airspace sanitation. It includes that in-flight buffer around the aircraft itself, and then a handful of other like standard operating procedures for remote pilots when avoidance situations do arise, and what we do. And there's also a river in this area that added some unique nuance to it as well. But yeah, so that one would be without visual observer.
Which we've been hearing from the FAA may be something that's going to become standardized across the Mode-C Veil operations for other DFR programs as well. Question here is, once payload is delivered and the aircraft returns, what's your turnaround time for reload and next flight?
Yeah, so good question. The operations kind of have 3 sets of standard operating procedures. One is for the dispatch team within the Emergency Communications Center. This is to help determine what particular calls they should or would basically qualify for this deployment. Is it a cardiac arrest? Is it an overdose? What is the ETA? Second SOP is for the paramedics that arrive on scene of a scene one of these deliveries had been flown to. So the person may have already had a dose of NARCAN administered. They might have already been shocked with a defibrillator and so forth. The third is the reset standard operating procedure. This describes basically how to get the aircraft back into service. So there's kind of like 2 core pieces that determine the time frame on that. One is how long was that flight beforehand? Basically, how much of the battery was depleted and how much time are we going to need to bring it back up to a specific threshold where it's acceptable to fly again. So that could be 40, 45 minutes, depending on how much of it was exhausted. And then the second piece of this is whether or not that particular station has secondary payloads. So we suggest when an agency has these systems and they're installed at a fire station that they have 2 or 3 of these payloads in stock at that station. So you can grab one off the shelf, load it into the aircraft, and get it back in its housing unit. However, if an agency only has one of these, then, the process is a little bit slower because it's, we got to get that defibrillator back. We got to get new pads in that AED. We got to, restock with another dose of NARCAN, repack up that payload and get it back in. So, in this particular operation, since we've only been doing this since May, and we haven't had our first live flight yet, just one that we were unable to fly to because of the weather. We haven't done a reset, so I don't have like a definitive number to provide. But based on the SOP, if you have a secondary payload, it gets loaded. It takes 10 seconds to load it back into the aircraft, and then maybe 30-40 minutes for those batteries to be brought back up to charge.
Okay. Just a kudos to you from Matt Isenberger saying congratulations, so cool for what you've done. Keep up the great work.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
I don't see any more questions. Anything else you want to add? And I know that you mentioned earlier about maybe there was some miscommunication of the unit being available or not available or something. Are you doing anything to automate that process that says it's in service so that when they go to dispatch, they can see it immediately, or how does that work?
Yeah. So that's how the system works right now. We basically have a consistent go, no-go state of the system that's changing every second of every day based on all of those variables I explained, like air traffic, TFRs, weather, power supply, GPS health, all the rest. In the rapid SOS integration, you have to request the deployment first. Before you will know whether or not that system is in a go or no-go state. In the rapid deploy integration, it will just be automatically displayed on that on the screen. So it's a little different from both of those platforms, but all of that is automated, and it's it's available either upon request or just automatically in Radius.
Okay, and Jimmy, I think one thing back, one of the things that's really important is the notification of your community. What did Manatee do in order to inform their citizens about the service that's going to be available so they would know?
Yeah, so I would just circle back to we had a couple advertised public hearings. So did public presentations, and then we did targeted flyers of the service area. So we used a polygon where this piece of equipment would deliver to, and we just did some targeted messaging to community members. I also think that we peppered it in. I say peppered, laid some seeds multiple times. Anytime that I went in front of the board to talk about anything that was public safety oriented or EMS oriented, I just laid in like the appropriate use of streamlining technology. And then I would be like, for example, the use of drones. I would just like strategic messaging.
And I think one of the things that's been interesting to see here, but not only with you, but with other DFR programs, is that the elected officials have become very big proponents and seeing the newer technology. And it sounds like Manatee has really taken a forefront of taking advantage of this emerging technology.
Yeah, and it's all about streamlining a very limited amount of resources within the community and doing first response more appropriately. There is no wrong reason to call 911 is the champion thing that I continue to say, but it is wrong for certain resources to be dispatched to calls. It's expensive to onboard FTEs. So if we're able to streamline resources and get people help faster, it just makes a whole lot more governmental sense.
And I guess back on the operational side, I don't know that we've asked this question, but what's involved, Gordon, from the standpoint of training people to be in kind of the operator seat?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So we've actually built out simulated versions of our systems that are fully compatible with both Rapid SOS Portal and Rapid Deploy Radius. So when an agency wants to implement these systems, we highly encourage that agency to use our simulated systems on live 911 calls for, 4 to 6 weeks before going live. I think the Manatee County Emergency Communication Dispatch team used our simulators for probably 3 months before we transitioned this into a live aircraft. The simulators are the exact same experience in the Emergency Communication Center as with a live aircraft. We basically create a 3D environment running real world physics with the physics of the aircraft, the actual flight control software stack, and then all of our pre-flight checks based on weather, air traffic, all the rest are active on those simulators. The cool thing with the simulators, obviously, you don't need a certificate of authorization, you don't need a waiver, you don't need insurance, you don't need anything. And you can also deploy them to any type of 911 call that you want just to get some repetition under your belt. So you don't necessarily have to wait for cardiac arrest or an overdose call. You can start deploying the simulators to any 911 call. And again, it is active in the live ECC, in Rapid SOS or Rapid Deploys Radius. So not only do you get that like practice of what does that workflow look like, what does the click flow look like, but you actually get real world data on response times, on frequency of calls, and you can start collecting this information. So for an agency that I would say is like curious about putting one of these systems in place, we offer these simulators for them to use. So I would encourage somebody to reach out and just ask us to set up a simulator for you, and you can start running it. And then you can actually start building a case where you can take it to your commissioners or to your leadership and say, hey, we ran the simulator for 2 months. Here's the average response time across all the calls we deployed it on. Here's what we think the outcome would look like. It's, it's worth pursuing or it's not worth pursuing. Maybe it doesn't make sense for an agency. But that's a big part of the training is using those simulators and getting some operational experience under your belt before transitioning into the live.
And if they're interested, they can send an email to the address for you that I put in the chat.
Probably. Let me double check the email, or I'll type it in here too. Yeah, there's my email. But yeah, we can set agencies up on simulators. They can start using them. Collect data, see what it's like, try it out. If you like it, awesome. If you don't, that's okay too.
Another question is the drop system an aftermarket add, or does it come with UAS purchase? And if it's an add-on, what are you using?
We developed that in-house. All of this is fully turnkey. So when you want to implement an Archer first response system, it'll have the ground control hub. We'll do the installation. It'll have the aircraft. It comes with a payload, including an Avive AED, a dose of NARCAN. And we actually just partnered with a really cool company called Golden Hour Medical. Jimmy actually made the intro. They have a device called the Auto TQ. It's like if a tourniquet and an AED had a baby. It's like you slip it on, you hit a button, and the tourniquet just inflates, so you don't have to know how to use it. It's freaking awesome. So that's included in one of the systems, which also has our payload, including the payload lowering system, the onboard computer. It has the FirstNet LTE connectivity embedded in it. So basically, it's the full package. Everything comes with it.
So one of the things that I guess hit me is that, so is the payload, are you carrying one thing, two things? Can you carry a combination? What's that look like as far as on the aircraft?
Yeah, so good question. We have a single payload that has all the devices in it. So that way we didn't really want to like over engineer some like swapping mechanism, because then also like the dispatcher would have to say, oh, pick the 8, like it's just another step in the process. So instead it's a single payload that has all the devices in it, and we can make these custom. So for example, if your agency wanted to use epinephrine and wanted to include an EpiPen in it, cool. Like we can make a custom payload. It'll fit all those devices in it, and that's fine. And we're also in the middle of development on a whole blood payload. We've gotten a lot of inbound requests on whole blood transit. And so we should have our actively cooled payload finished out this year for whole blood operations as well. But that one has a little of unique nuance. It's not going to go to a lay rescue. It'll go to a paramedic that's on scene requesting blood. That one will only have the blood in it, not the other devices. But yeah, so it's usually just a single unit that has everything in it.
Oh, very good. I was sitting here trying to figure, do you have to go up and switch it or something? And now that I explained, it makes a lot of sense. It's a good good way of doing it.
I like to think of it as like it's like a gun on a hairpin trigger. Like everything's ready to go at a moment's notice, and when it's needed, you just click to deploy, and then everything just happens.
Very good. So, Jimmy, any last words? I don't have any more questions so far. Any wrap up?
I would just say that if you think of things from a systems perspective and doing what's right for the individual who's trying to access emergency medical response, it just makes sense, right? Get help to the people who need help as quickly as possible so we can make a difference in someone else's life.
Gordon, any last thoughts?
No, if anyone is interested to learn more, if I didn't answer any questions, or if anyone has interest to dive even deeper into the technology stack, what's under the hood, regulations, how we manage things, feel free to reach out. Happy to share, how we do things.
Yeah, so we'll probably reach out probably in the next 6 or 8 months and come back and see how things are going and give an update report from you guys as to how things are going. One, thank you all very much for your participation today and sharing the information. As we know, drones as a first responder continues to evolve. And I think one of the things you pointed out was this is really interesting from a standpoint. This is a new emergency drone logistics approach. So you're kind of created a new element in the whole DFR world. So thank you all for sharing. And I think everybody got a great deal out of today's presentation. This will be on the Drone Responders YouTube channel in about a day or so, and you'll have that recording that you can share with others as well. So thank you again, and congratulations to Manatee for their willingness to be innovative and look out for the citizens of their community.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles.
All right, everybody, that wraps up this webinar from Drone Responders. And again, DFR continues to change the world as we see it, as well as we see the FAA changing new rules with Mode C Veil and some other operations to get us away from having visual observers from the human perspective and getting more into technology, which will continue to help this evolve. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.